There are voices that build us up and voices that tear us down. But the most dangerous voices, they're the ones we start to believe. They become the soundtrack to our lives, that constant, nagging reminder of what we supposedly lack. For a young woman named Sarah, those voices weren't just in her head. They were sitting around her dinner table, echoing in the hallways of her childhood home. Her family, the very people who were supposed to be her biggest fans, had instead become the architects of her self-doubt. They labeled her a failure, and for a long, long time, Sarah believed them. This is the story of how an unexpected meeting with a man whose job was to break people down was the only thing that could build her back up. The Sunday dinner was a weekly ritual, a command performance Sarah couldn't escape. It felt less like a family gathering and more like a tribunal where she was always the one on trial. Tonight, the air was thick with judgment. Her older sister, Emily, was home on a short leave from basic training. Her posture was ramrod straight, and she radiated a new, formidable confidence that just made Sarah feel even more like a mess. Her father cleared his throat, a sound that meant court was in session. He turned to Emily. "So tell us again about that obstacle course. Sounds like you're setting records." Emily, ever the humble soldier, just shrugged. "It's just practice, Dad. We run it every day. You get used to it." "Nonsense," her mother chimed in, beaming. "Your drill sergeant said you were a natural leader." "A natural. We're so proud." That word proud just hung in the air, a prize Sarah felt she could never quite grasp. She stared down at her plate, pushing a pea around with her fork. She'd tried. She really had. She went to college just like they wanted, majored in business, the sensible choice they'd picked out. But she struggled. Her anxiety turned lectures into hostage situations and exams into verdicts on her worth. She graduated, but just barely, with a degree she hated and a mountain of student debt. Now at 24, she was working a dead-end data entry job, living in a tiny apartment she could barely afford, and feeling like she was drowning in slow motion. Her father's attention swung to her, his eyes heavy with that familiar disappointment. "And Sarah," he said, his tone shifting from warm to cool, "how is everything?" That vague, loaded question was a trap, and she knew it. It wasn't really a question. It was an invitation to confess her latest failures. "It's fine," she mumbled, the automatic reply. "Work is fine." "Fine," her father repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a failing grade. "Your mother tells me you missed another car payment." Sarah's cheeks burned hot. "I had an unexpected expense. The plumbing in my apartment." "Always an excuse," her mother sighed. It wasn't mean, but the weary resignation in her voice was somehow worse. "Sarah, dear, we just worry. You don't seem to have any drive. Look at your sister. She knew what she wanted, and she went for it. You just float." Floating. That's exactly what it felt like. Adrift in a sea of their expectations, with the shore of their approval getting further away all the time. The pressure wasn't a loud, angry storm. It was a quiet, constant erosion of her spirit. It had created a deep-seated anxiety and a paralyzing fear of failure that made it impossible for her to take any risks. Her worth, she had learned, was tied to her achievements, and since she didn't have many to show off, she felt fundamentally worthless. Emily, seeing her sister's distress, tried to jump in. "Mom, Dad, lay off. It's not that easy." But their father just waved a dismissive hand. "It's about character, Emily, grit. Some people have it, and some people don't." The unspoken words hung in the silence, and Sarah doesn't. The rest of the dinner was a blur. Sarah just retreated into herself, feeling small and invisible, a ghost at her own family's feast. The label they'd given her, failure, was a heavy cloak she couldn't figure out how to take off. She had internalized their criticism so deeply that their voices had become her own. She was trapped, believing so strongly that she couldn't change her life that she'd just stopped trying. She didn't know it yet, but the one person who could break that cycle was waiting for her on a dusty parade ground, about to see something in her no one else had ever bothered to look for. Family Day at Fort Jackson was a whole different world. The air crackled with a disciplined energy, sharp commands, rhythmic marching, and the pride of families seeing their sons and daughters in uniform. Sarah felt like an alien who had landed in the wrong place. She stood awkwardly by the bleachers, clutching a water bottle, trying to make herself invisible while her parents scanned the formations for Emily. When the soldiers were finally dismissed, Emily jogged over, her face flushed. The hugs from her parents were long, the praise endless. Sarah offered a small, real smile. "You look great, Em." "Thanks, Sarah, it's a lot," Emily admitted, her voice low enough for only Sarah to hear. "But it's good." As they were talking, a figure approached. He moved with an unnerving stillness and purpose that made everyone else seem like they were in slow motion. He was tall and lean, with a face that looked like it was carved from granite. The campaign hat cast a shadow over his eyes, but it couldn't hide their intensity. This had to be Drill Sergeant Miller. "Private," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the noise. He nodded curtly at her parents. "Sir, ma'am." Her father, a man not easily impressed, seemed to stand a little straighter. "Drill Sergeant, it's an honor. You've done wonders with our daughter." Drill Sergeant Miller's gaze flickered to Emily with an almost imperceptible nod. "Your daughter has done the work, sir. She's got heart." Then his eyes moved past her parents, past Emily, and landed right on Sarah. It was unsettling. He wasn't just looking at her, he was scanning her, like an X-ray reading her slumped posture, her downcast eyes, her fidgeting hands. Sarah's first instinct was to shrink. Most people's eyes just slid right past her. She was used to it. But Miller's gaze was different. It was analytical, curious, and unnervingly perceptive. He wasn't dismissing her. He was actually seeing her. "This is our other daughter, Sarah," her mother said, with a hint of apology in her voice. "Ma'am," Miller said, his eyes still locked on Sarah. He didn't offer a handshake, just gave a slight, assessing tilt of his head. An awkward silence fell over them. Sarah could feel her family's collective embarrassment. Here was their golden child, the soldier, and then there was Sarah, the one who just floated. Trying to break the tension, Emily said, "Sarah came all the way down to support me. It was a long drive." Miller's focus didn't waver. "Support is good," he said. He looked at her posture again, the way her shoulders curved inward like she was protecting herself. He saw something flicker in her eyes, not just anxiety, but a deep, buried exhaustion. It was a look he recognized. He'd seen it in new recruits on the verge of quitting, the ones told their whole lives they weren't good enough. Most of them broke, but some had a spark hidden under all that ash. His job was to see a person's architecture, to find the stress fractures and load-bearing walls of their character. You had to see the raw material to rebuild someone. And in Sarah, beneath all the self-doubt, he saw something. It was faint, a barely detectable tremor, but it was there. A flicker of fight. It was in the stubborn set of her jaw, even as her eyes looked away. He recognized it as dormant resilience. He turned his attention back to Emily and her parents, but that brief, intense encounter had left its mark on Sarah. She'd spent her whole life being defined by her family. Their judgment was the only mirror she'd ever had. But in those few seconds under Drill Sergeant Miller's gaze, she hadn't felt judgment. She'd felt seen. It was a completely new and terrifying feeling. Later, as they were getting ready to leave, Emily pulled her aside. "Hey, Drill Sergeant Miller asked about you." Sarah blinked. "He did? What did he say?" "He just asked what your story was. I told him you were trying to figure things out." Emily hesitated. "And then he said something weird. He said, 'Sometimes the toughest fights aren't on the battlefield.'" Those words sent a strange shiver through Sarah. For the first time, someone had looked at her quiet internal struggle and hadn't called it weakness or a lack of ambition. They had called it a fight. A week later, back in her lonely apartment, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. "Sarah?" The voice was unmistakable, low, direct. "Drill Sergeant Miller?" she stammered, her heart starting to pound. "Your sister gave me your number," he said, as if that explained it all. "She's worried about you, says you're stuck." Sarah was speechless. Humiliation washed over her. Her sister was talking about her with her drill sergeant? As if he could read her mind, Miller's tone softened, just a fraction. "Private Emily sees you as strong. She told me stories from when you were kids, how you stood up for her, how you never backed down when you believed in something." Sarah couldn't remember the last time anyone had called her strong. "I don't train civilians, Sarah," he continued, his voice back to its usual gravelly tone. "But I'm on leave next week, visiting family in your city. Meet me at the public track at 0600 on Monday. Wear running shoes." It wasn't a request, it was an order. Before she could even think of an excuse, he spoke again. "You can keep floating," he said, turning her mother's word into a challenge. "Or you can learn to swim. Your choice." And then he hung up. Sarah just stood there in her living room, the dial tone buzzing in her ear. Her mind was a mess of confusion, fear, and a tiny, unfamiliar feeling: hope. A man who built soldiers for a living had just thrown her a lifeline. He hadn't offered pity. He hadn't offered empty words. He had offered a challenge. For the first time in years, someone was looking at her and not seeing a failure, but potential. And it was the most terrifying and exhilarating feeling she had ever known. The air at 6 in the morning was cold and sharp. The public track was deserted except for the solitary, imposing figure of Drill Sergeant Miller. He stood with his arms crossed, a statue of discipline, totally unfazed by the pre-dawn chill. Sarah, huddled in an old sweatshirt, felt a wave of nausea. What on earth was she doing here? This was insane. "You're late," Miller said, as she walked up. It was 6:01. My alarm," she started, but the excuse died under his steady gaze. "Excuses are dead weight," he said, not unkindly, just as a fact. "They slow you down. Let's drop 'em. First lap, go." He didn't say run, just go. Sarah started a slow, shuffling jog. Her lungs started to burn almost right away. Her legs felt like lead. The critical voice in her head, the one that sounded just like her parents', started up. "You can't do this. You're not an athlete. You're going to make a fool of yourself." By the first turn, she was already winded. Miller just stood there silently, watching. She finished the lap and stumbled to a stop in front of him, gasping for air. "I can't. I'm not a runner." "Didn't ask you to be a runner," he said calmly. "I asked you to complete a lap. You did. Now do another one." The second lap was pure misery. Every step was a battle. She wanted to stop, to just lie down on the damp grass and give up. It would be so easy. It's what everyone expected anyway. But then she caught his eye. He wasn't yelling or jeering. He was just watching. His stillness held a silent expectation, a demand that she meet this one small goal. So she kept going. After the second lap, she collapsed onto the bleachers, her chest heaving. "Why are you doing this?" she gasped. He walked over and stood in front of her. "Because your sister respects you, and I respect my soldiers. So I respect their judgment." He paused. "And because I see you quitting on yourself before you've even started the race." That hit her harder than any physical pain. "You don't know me," she whispered. "I know the look of someone who's been told they're weak so many times they believe it," he countered. "I see it in recruits every cycle. They show up carrying the weight of other people's opinions. My job is to make them shed that weight so they can carry their own pack." The next few days followed the same pattern. Each morning was a simple, direct command. Run a lap. Do 10 push-ups. She could only manage 2 from her knees. Do 20 sit-ups. She barely got to 12. His method was to break everything down into the smallest possible piece, a manageable goal. He was giving her small, achievable wins to build a new pattern of success. But her mind fought back hard. "I'm not strong enough for this," she'd say, her muscles shaking during a plank. "Strength isn't about how much you can lift," he'd reply, his voice steady. "It's about what you do when you think you can't lift anymore. Hold it 5 more seconds." And somehow, she would. Those 5 seconds were agony, but afterward, a tiny spark of accomplishment would bubble up through the pain. The shift was subtle at first. It started at her job. Her boss dropped a last-minute report on her desk, the kind of thing that would normally send her into a panic. She felt it rising, that voice whispering, "You'll mess this up." But then she heard Miller's voice in her head. "Break it down, one task at a time." So she did. She made a list. She did the first item, then the next. Hours later, the report was done, and it was good. She hadn't panicked. She had just done the work. At the track, the changes were easier to see. One morning, she ran a full mile without stopping. It wasn't pretty, but she did it. As she crossed the imaginary finish line, gasping but still standing, she saw Miller give a slight nod. It wasn't praise, it was acknowledgement, a simple, powerful confirmation of her effort. He started talking to her more during their cool-down stretches. asking pointed questions. "What did you want to be before they told you what you should be?" he asked one day. The question caught her off guard. "I don't know. An artist, maybe? I used to love to paint." "Why'd you stop?" "My parents said it wasn't practical, that I wasn't talented enough to make it." "Their opinion of your talent doesn't matter," Miller said flatly. "Did it bring you joy?" Joy. The idea of doing something just for joy was completely foreign. He was challenging the very foundation of her world, where her self-worth was tied to what other people thought. He explained the why behind his methods. "We run until it hurts because it teaches you that discomfort is temporary. Pain is a signal, not a stop sign." This was about reframing failure. One day she tripped during a drill, scraping her knee. Her first instinct was shame. She expected him to be annoyed. Instead, he just helped her up. "You fell? So what? Get up. Assess the damage. If it's a scrape, you keep going. If you're hurt, you adapt. Failure is just data. It tells you what not to do next time." The real test came about a month in during a phone call with her mother. "I just don't understand this new obsession with exercise," her mother said. "You should be focusing on your career, finding a better job." "I feel good, Mom," Sarah said. "I feel stronger." "Stronger?" "Sarah, being able to run isn't going to pay your bills," her mother sighed. "It's another one of your phases. You're just distracting yourself." Those words hit like a punch to the gut. The next morning at the track, she was a mess. Miller saw it instantly. "What's wrong?" he asked. Her composure shattered. "My mother," she said, tears streaming down her face. "She said this is all a pointless distraction, that I'm still a failure. And maybe she's right. What am I even doing here? This isn't changing anything." He let her finish, then said quietly, "You think this is about running? You think I'm out here at 6 a.m. because I want you to win a medal?" He took a step closer. "Every time you finish a lap you thought you couldn't, you're telling that voice in your head to shut up. This has nothing to do with your mother or your father. This is about you. Their words only have the power you give them. You built a prison for yourself out of their opinions. This," he gestured to the track, "is you learning how to use the key." It was the turning point. She finally got it. The physical struggle was a metaphor for the emotional one. He gave her a new challenge. "There's a 10K race in the city in 2 months. You're going to run it." Panic flared. 10 kilometers? I can't do that. That's impossible." "Good," he said, a rare thin smile on his face. "Then we have our mission." Race day arrived with a nervous, electric buzz. The city streets were blocked off, swarming with thousands of runners. Sarah stood in the middle of it all, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her parents and Emily were on the sidelines near the finish line. They'd come for support, but she could see the skepticism in their eyes, like they were just waiting for her to quit. Drill Sergeant Miller was there too, standing a little way off from her family, a quiet anchor in the chaos. He met her gaze and gave a single, sharp nod. He'd already given her the tools. The rest was on her. The starting horn blared. For the first few kilometers, Sarah felt good, her training kicking in. But around the halfway mark, the real fight began. A grueling hill loomed ahead. As her legs began to burn, the old voices crept back in. "You're not strong enough. You're going to fail. Everyone is watching you fail." She saw other runners walking, defeated by the hill. The urge to join them was overwhelming. It would be so easy to prove her family right. Then she remembered what Miller had told her. "This hill isn't your enemy, Sarah. It's your measuring stick. It doesn't change. The only thing that changes is you." She looked at the hill again. It was a measuring stick. And she wasn't the same person she was 2 months ago. She was stronger. So she leaned forward and pumped her arms, tackling the hill, one step at a time. When she reached the top, her lungs were on fire, but she felt a fierce surge of triumph. She hadn't broken. The last few kilometers were pure willpower. Her body screamed at her to stop. But now, she could also hear Miller's voice. "Discomfort is temporary." She heard her own voice, the new one. "You are strong. You can do this." As she rounded the final corner, she saw the finish line. She saw her family. Her mother's hand was over her mouth. Her father's face was a mask of pure shock. And Emily was beaming, tears in her eyes, screaming her name. In that moment, Seeing their disbelief, Sarah realized something. She'd started this to prove them wrong, but pushing through those final agonizing meters, she knew it wasn't about them anymore. It was about her. It was about crossing this finish line for the girl who thought she couldn't. She poured every last ounce of energy into a final sprint and stumbled across the finish line, her body spent, her spirit soaring. A few minutes later, a volunteer draped a finisher's medal around her neck. Her family approached, their usual confident chatter gone. It was her father who spoke first, his voice strangely quiet. "Sarah, we had no idea." He looked at the medal, then back at her face. "We were wrong." It was the most profound apology he could offer. Her mother just hugged her tight and whispered, "I'm so proud of you." And for the first time, Sarah believed it. But the most important conversation came a moment later. She walked over to Drill Sergeant Miller. He looked her up and down, his gaze stopping on the medal. "Good work," he said. It was the highest praise imaginable from him. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing something in me." He shook his head slightly. "I didn't give you anything you didn't already have, Sarah. All I did was hold up a mirror until you were strong enough to see your own reflection." He looked toward the finish line. "The race is over. Your mission now is to remember what this feels like. Don't let anyone take this away from you." In the weeks that followed, everything changed, because Sarah had changed. She did get a new job, one she liked. She enrolled in a night class for painting, not to become a famous artist, but just because it brought her joy. Her relationship with her family transformed. The pressure was gone, replaced by a new respect. They'd seen her cross that finish line, and it forced them to see her differently. But more importantly, Sarah had learned to define her own success. She no longer needed their approval to feel worthy. Sarah's story is a powerful reminder that our limits are often just a story someone else told us. An unlikely mentor taught her that the key to her freedom wasn't about proving her doubters wrong, but about proving herself right. True strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, again and again. It's about facing the hills in our lives not as obstacles, but as measuring sticks for our own growth. And it's a reminder that the most important voice we can listen to is the one that whispers, "Against all odds, keep going." Important voice we can listen to is the one that whispers. Against all Sarah's journey is a powerful reminder that our limits are often just the stories others have told us. For so long, she let the voices of doubt and disappointment dictate her path. But through the guidance of an unexpected mentor, she realized that true strength is not about avoiding failure. It's about learning from it and continuing to rise. Life is filled with hills that seem impossible to climb. But the real test isn't in the obstacle, it's in how we respond to it. So remember this, the toughest battles are often the ones we fight within ourselves. If Sarah's story resonates with you, don't let it stop here. Hit that like button to show your support for personal growth, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a transformative story like this. In the comments below, share your own moments of struggle and triumph. When did you prove the doubters wrong? Your story could inspire someone who needs to hear it today.